day to you, and welcome back to the channel. So I have a car full of typewriters, probably 15 or 16 of them, and this afternoon I'm going over to the Cherry Hills Library here in Albuquerque to facilitate a writer's workshop which involves introducing writers to using typewriters as part of their workflow. This workshop was originally going to be taught by Woz Flint, but she had an unscheduled family emergency, so I'm standing in for her. But what I wanted to talk to you guys about today was the biggest tool I have, the most useful tool I have for being able to conduct writers' workshops and public type-ins involving typewriters. And that is the typewriter collection itself. So it's a day later, and the workshop was a great success. So I brought 17 typewriters, as you saw, and a few of the participants also brought their own typewriters. So we had more typewriters than we needed for the workshop. But as I suggested at the beginning of this video, one of the great blessings that I have for having accumulated a fairly large collection of typewriters, I think it's about 45, which is not really large, by the way, compared to a lot of people, even newcomers to this hobby, 6 months into it, have 50 or more typewriters often. I was thinking the other day as I was planning for this, which machines to bring, etc. Wow, I couldn't be able to do this. I couldn't be able to support these kinds of typewriter-related activities and also public type-ins like we do without having a collection of typewriters. And so, as it's happened over the years since I got into typewriters in the mid-aughts, I think the Royal Mercury was my first real typewriter in the sense of being conscious of typewriters as a thing to enjoy, not just having one of them as a writing tool, but things to collect and study and learn about. As I got into typewriters, I was really attracted initially to small portable typewriters and later medium-sized portables, and now more recently I've gotten into the full-size standard machines. But one thing that's been consistent about my collection over the years is that I've always been interested in typewriters that functioned. In other words, I was never the kind of guy that was collecting early 20th century, late 19th century typewriters just to have them on display as artifacts. My interest was always about using typewriters as practical tools for writing with. They have to be usable. And so even some of the pre-World War II portables barely satisfy that criteria. Some of them are a little bit janky or not quite as well suited for long-form writing, for instance. So that has been kind of the focus of my collecting. And as it's turned out, the kind of collection I've built has been ideally suited for using them in public typewriter venues. Because if I had a collection of, say, early 20th century rare typewriters, the kinds that you wouldn't want people slamming on and bashing on, for instance, then I wouldn't be bringing them out to public type-ins for people of all walks of life to walk in and use. So I'm collecting more like mid-century, like Smith Coronas are always popular with me, the 5 series and stuff like that, the 6 series, because they're rugged, they're easy to use, they're fairly easy to service, and they're plentiful. So they're not necessarily very expensive. So those kind of machines always attracted me, just aesthetically and practically speaking, but they worked really well for the kinds of uses that I have now for typewriters. Those uses are that when Kevin Kittle and I were sitting on his veranda one night a few years ago, and we started talking about forming our own local typewriter society that we whimsically called the Albuquerque Typewriter Society, we purposefully made type and writer as 2 separate words because our interest was not only in the collecting and repairing and maintaining of the hardware, what you might call the tech side of it, but our interest was also in fostering the use of typewriting. It was creative uses. And just recently, with the addition of our member Woz Flint to our group, have we really started expanding into reaching out to the community with typewriters being used for creative purposes, for writers. And that was the purpose of this workshop. And so again, having a collection of typewriters that's practically suited to be used for writing, especially in these venues where people who are in the workshops may be total neophytes to typewriters. They have never used them, or the last time they used them was, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Having typewriters that work well and are fairly easy to use, don't have bugs in them, just good writing machines, it really helps that kind of a workshop. And it also directs them toward, if they're interested in getting their own typewriter, they can look at the kinds of machines we bring to these workshops and say, oh, okay, I can see why that machine, it's just kind of bland looking, but it works really well over maybe this really pretty early 20th century beauty, but that's more of a display piece and not a practical piece necessarily. And so as I was talking with a friend of mine the other day about typewriter collecting and keeping the typewriters maintained properly, in the course of our conversation, he made this amazing statement. He said, I am more of a Robinson Carusoe, and he is more of a restorer collector, meaning that his interest is in restoring the machines to as original condition as possible, whereas my interest is more in pragmatic use. And one of those examples is that was actually caused this statement to be said was the clear card guides on typewriters and how easily they can be broken. And he was looking for a replacement for a 6 series Smith Corona. And I told him, well, I have this Nakajima-made Typewriter Electric branded as an Olympia reporter, and it had broken plastic card guides. And what I did is I found a hard, clear plastic drink or food container in my recycle bin that had the right curve to it. And I cut those two out and even marked a Sharpie marker, a typing line on it, and fashioned them into replacement card guides. And they actually fit closer to the platen than the original. So when you thread your paper up, it feeds underneath the paper bale rollers quite easily. And so he calls me the Robinson Carusoe because I'm the guy that's cobbling together coconuts into wireless phones. I don't know, use the Gilligan's Island analogy there for you Americans who remember the Gilligan's Island show. Yeah, I'm okay with that because the purpose of my collecting are having machines that work. And if I have to cobble together a makeshift card guide out of a clear plastic food container, I'll do it if I can't find the original, like a parts machine. In that case, that kind of a typewriter, Japanese-made Typewriter Electric, a little bit less common in my parts. So I was happy to make it functional with a non-original part. And that's just kind of reflecting my bigger philosophy about typewriter collecting. It's all about, for me, pragmatic use of typewriters, making them useful, making them usable. And as my typewriter collecting has evolved over the years and our typewriter society has grown and our activities have increased, of course I'm not collecting as many now as I used to be, partly because the prices are much higher and they're not as common, at least good quality machines aren't as common in the local thrift stores and antique stores as they once were. But I'm also not as hungry for collecting typewriters. But when I do find one that I'm interested in, my first concern is really about, can I use that typewriter in a type-in? In other words, is it the kind of a machine that's rugged, easy to use, not too rare, priceless, precious, that I wouldn't want the public to be using it? And so that kind of directs my current typewriter collecting. And so if you are wanting to optimize your typewriter collection for the general public's use during type-ins, you should consider at least 1 or 2 Typewriter Electrics, even if personally you don't like using them. There's a lot of people that do, especially young people. Young people really like Typewriter Electrics because a lot of them don't have the hand strength for a manual machine, and it becomes kind of a gateway to the bigger world of manual typewriters by introducing them with either Typewriter Electrics like this Olympia Reporter made by Nakajima, or even a daisy wheel electronic typewriter or a Selectric. Something to consider. what I'll offer to you in closing is that if you are a typewriter collector and you are thinking about expanding your typewriter world in your community to reach out with type-ins and maybe doing workshops for writers, you might think about making sure your collection has a number of good, solid, reliable typewriters that the public can use. And so I do have a few machines that I occasionally bring to type-ins that I kind of always look out of the corner of my eye and make sure nobody's bashing on them, like the little Corona 3 is a delicate little thing, and you don't want somebody just smashing it. So that informs my typewriter collecting, and something you might want to think about if you want to expand your typewriter world into reaching out to your community. Build a typewriter collection suitable for public type-ins. And with that, I'll leave you, and as always, stay creative and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.